Hello friends, today I'm going to help you understand whether long-term or short-term properties are more profitable. So were you better off owning a short-term rental or a long-term rental? Which one's more profitable? By the end of this video, I will answer that question and cut through the BS so you have a clear path to know which investment is right for you. I know a lot of people that are extremely passionate about investing in long-term rentals. And on the other hand, I know a lot of people that are passionate about owning and operating short-term rentals. So which investment is better? Well, today I want to answer those questions by first talking about the upsides and downsides of both long-term rentals and short-term rentals. Next, I want to focus on how profitability is factored into these two types of investment strategies. And finally, I want to explain how your personal situation can play a role in that decision. And I'll give you my opinion on which investment strategy that I personally like and why I feel it is the best. If you're ready, let's go. So what is a long-term rental? It is a place where somebody wants to stay for a long period of time, typically longer than a year. Most of the leases in long-term rentals are 12 months or more. And those can be apartments, single-family residences. And what is the upside of a long-term rental? Well, typically it's one tenant for a long period of time. And when somebody rents a long-term rental, they treat it a lot of times like it's the home that they live in. If they're a good tenant, that's where they live. They're going to take care of it. They're going to upkeep it. They take care of all the utilities typically. And so there's very little hassle, right? You might not even hear from somebody who lives in your long-term rental for months, possibly years. So what's the downside of long-term rentals? A lot of times they're lower rates. People are paying less in a long-term versus a short-term. If you own multiple units, there's lots of upkeep for each door. They could be more expensive if it's a multi-unit, larger loans, more down payment. You know, when I was early on investing, I had a couple of big wins early on with some multifamily units. I was then searching for something bigger. I wanted an apartment complex. And I had some partners that were going to go in with me on it. And I found an apartment complex. It was a 46-unit apartment complex. And my partners and I ended up buying it. And I thought, man, I'd hit gold, right? And this was clear back probably 20 years ago. And it was bringing in almost $20,000 a month, which somebody say, that's great, right? But obviously we had a big mortgage payment. We had expenses. There was a lot of things. We tried to self-manage initially or have some people that lived there do some of the management. And I'll tell you, it took a lot of time. It was kind of a time suck, but it was a good foray into real estate investing for long-term rentals to help give me a good understanding of what those are like. So now let's talk about short-term rentals. What is a short-term rental? Well, those are typically nightly stays, usually 2 days or more, less than a week usually. They're vacation rentals where people want a vacation to. So a lot of times they're in vacation destinations or larger cities or cities downtown where people can go and stay. Maybe it's a condo, maybe it's a single family dwelling, maybe it's a townhome. It could be a lot of different things. I've even seen some super cool short-term rentals that are made out of metal containers. Some of them are tiny homes. Some of them have been converted into short-term rentals like grain bins or barns. So there's a lot of cool things happening in the short-term world, but they could literally be anything that is rented out for a vacation or a short-term stay. The other cool thing about short-term rentals is you can visit there yourself. My family and I, we love to visit the short-term rentals and vacation rentals that we own. We have a couple that are close to us that we're able to go and visit occasionally when somebody's not staying there. And my family loves to go visit those places. So what are the upsides of short-term rentals? Well, number one, you get more money per unit. It's one door, and because it's turned over on a short-term basis, you have more money coming in. I said one of the other upsides is you can go visit yourself. When demand is low, you can go stay there. You can do some upkeep, fix it up. A lot of times it's less money up front because it could be a second home. This happened to us when I bought my vacation rental, short-term rental in Blue Ridge, Georgia, where it was my second home after my primary residence. I only had to put 10% down. So I bought the property for $520,000. So I only had to put down $52,000 plus some closing costs. But rather than putting down 20 to 30% on maybe a multi-unit or apartment complex, it was a whole lot less out of my pocket. So my cash on cash return was a lot better than potentially a long-term rental. So what's the downside of a short-term rental? Well, there's lots of turnover. There's people that are staying there quite frequently. There's going to be a lot more wear and tear on a short-term rental than a long-term rental. So now let's talk about how profitability is factored into these two investment strategies. So looking at long-term rentals, we have revenue or rents that come in. So you have total rents minus management fee minus expenses. And what are those expenses? Well, you got repairs, you got lawn care, you got snow removal if you live in an area that has snow, utilities like gas, heat, water, garbage, advertising. And a lot of times, let's look at some of the numbers. Let's say you have a long-term rental. Let's say that you purchase that property for $300,000. You're able to rent that out to a tenant for $2,000 a month. So $2,000 a month times 12, $24,000 in the course of a year. If the tenant is paying all of those expenses and you're managing yourself, you're probably going to see a fair amount drop to the bottom bottom line. And if it's a single family residence, an investment property, if you put 20% down, maybe $60,000, but let's say you're netting about $15,000, still not a bad investment, but putting down say $60,000 and receiving say $15,000 every year, not a bad investment strategy. And typically if you got a mortgage on that, you're getting a lot less, but hopefully it's increasing with appreciation. Now that's a single family residence and a long-term rental strategy. But if you have a fourplex and you're renting out 4 doors, once again, maybe you're renting out those doors for $1,500 each, that's $6,000. But what did you pay for that fourplex, right? And so obviously you've got people paying the expenses, most of them, but there is a mortgage that's being paid. And so your bottom line is definitely reduced on those long-term rentals. Let's look at a short-term rental now. Now with a short-term rental, you've got all the rents that come in. Now it's gonna vary. And typically you're not gonna find a short-term rental that's kicking off the type of income you want for $300,000. So typically, if we take my Blue Ridge short-term rental, for example, bought it for $520,000 and I put 10% down or $50,000 with closing costs, let's call it $65,000. It's measured the same way, right? So that first year we did roughly $82,000 in annual rents, but we paid for everything. The guests don't pay for the electricity. They don't pay for lawn care. They don't pay for anything, right? We pay for all of that. So all of the expenses, all the utilities, the mortgage payment, I got a good interest rate on the loan, is about 3.5%, 30-year loan. So payments were below $3,000, about $2,900. And so over the course of the year, it's $36,000. All of my annual expenses, we had to do a few repairs because the home was a little bit older, but everything year one, about $25,000 dropped to the bottom line for that short-term rental. So I went out of pocket, say $65,000. I netted $25,000. What's my cash on cash return? Well, if I divide $65,000 into 25, that's gonna be close to about 35, 36, 37% cash on cash return. That is a fantastic cash on cash return. Versus a long-term rental, if you put down say $60,000 and you brought in $6,000, that's a 10% cash on cash return. Still not bad, but a short-term rental in that scenario. Now, there's gonna be a lot of different scenarios that you can use and you can play out, but what I've seen with short-term rentals on a cash on cash return, a lot of times outweighs the long-term rental. But before we dive into that, and I'm probably leaning a little bit to which one I like the most, how does your personal situation play into which strategy is best for you versus a long-term rental or a short-term rental? Really, it comes down to time and money. If you have more time on your hands, a short-term rental might be a good option. And why is that? Because it takes a lot more time to run a short-term rental than a long-term rental. You've got people requesting stays, asking questions all over Airbnb, Vrbo. You've got to be able to respond quickly. If you don't, you're going to lose those people. When people are staying there, they might have simple questions about what's the internet password? How do I do this? Where's the crock pot? You're going to spend more time. Now, it's not always the case, but compared to a long-term rental, it definitely takes way more time. If you've got a little bit more money and you can invest in a big project like an apartment complex and have somebody manage that for you so you don't have to spend any time, or a storage unit that is managed by somebody, that is going to save you a lot of time and energy. So depending on what is more important for you, time or money, will help you make the decision on short-term rental. So which one do I like? Well, obviously I've been leaning the whole time. I'm a big fan of short-term rentals. And why is that? Because I feel like the return is so much greater, and typically buying these homes, I'm trying to get them at a good price and I'm buying them in an area that I believe is going to appreciate. And just to drive it home, I talked about 2 different examples. I talked about that Apple Tree Apartments that I bought in Rexburg, Idaho, 46 doors that was kicking off $20,000 a month, not in net profit, but in gross revenue. So 46 units brought in $20,000. Now, given this was 20 years ago, but the one short-term rental that I have close to Yellowstone National Park in Island Park, last year in July, it brought in $39,000. 1 door, 1 unit versus 46. Now, don't get me wrong, there's months that bring in $1,000 because it's really slow in November and really slow in March and April. But for me, that was really eye-opening to realize that 1 unit, 1 door could bring in that much money with a short-term rental. And even though it was more expensive, it cost less than half of what Apple Tree Apartments cost 20 years ago and still brought in that type of revenue. Those are things that I've seen. I'd be interested in what you'd think. Do you believe long-term rentals are better or short-term rentals? Comment below. Let's engage in a dialogue. And as always, just for stopping by and watching the video, I've got a free gift for you. It's aaronsfreetraining.com. Just click on that link. It's a short-term rental calculator. You put in all the data, the revenue, the income, the expenses, and it spits out to you whether it's a good deal or not. And it's free of charge, no strings attached. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Have an amazing day.